Okay. Are we on YouTube? Okay. Call this meeting of the Planning Commission to order Wednesday, October 19th. First, I'd like to welcome our guests from the Community Service Advisory Board members. So thank you for coming and appreciate hearing from you guys later. Staff could take roll.
Paul Wagaman,
You said Wagaman? You did? Oh, I'm present, sorry.
Philip Combs,
Present.
Lynn Larson is excused at this moment. Brian Parsons,
Present.
Robert Estrada. Don Daniels is excused at this time. Ryan Pearson,
Here.
you have quorum.
Okay, looking for a motion to accept the minutes from the October 5th, 2022 meeting.
I'll make a motion. We accept the minutes as written.
Mr. Wagaman made the motion. Go a second.
I'll second.
Mr. Combs with the second. Any comments, abstentions? Those in, will approve the minutes. Oh my goodness. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Minutes passed as written. We have agenda updates, and I believe that we are going to be switching the new business item number 8 to in front of number 6. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Chair, if we could move item agenda or the 2 bullet items under item 8 up above number 6, that would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Okay. And then we have any public comments? Those of you, anyone wishing to, yep. Please state the city you reside in.
Glenn Spaeth, Lakewood. Came to talk about LASA. They're such a great neighbor. I'm less than a block away. On 59th, there's always furniture dumped up along the street at 59th and Gravely Lake Drive. It's been a mess there for years. Things that they dump out, don't want to use anymore. They leave it along the road for people to pick up. The other thing is that I went in to talk about a friend of mine. And they said, go to Pierce County. Well, if everybody has to go to Pierce County and we're taking care of LASA in Lakewood, and I know that they're subsidized to a great extent, both property value wise as well as tax wise and so forth. I am not happy with the way they've done things. And they're expanding totally around the block, all along 59th, as well as the property they already have on Gravely Lake Drive. I don't appreciate what they're doing or what they're bringing in. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak under public comment? Do we have anyone online?
No,
I
Mr.
think
Chair.
so. Seeing or hearing no others, we'll close public comments and move to new business. The 2024 Comprehensive Plan Periodic Review Process, PSRC Vision 2050 and Regional Housing Work.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this evening, and again, thank you to the Community Service Advisory Board members who have attended this evening. We have a guest speaker from the Puget Sound Regional Council named Laura Benjamin, who will begin speaking in just a minute. But that, in addition to what I'll be talking about after her regarding housing programs, are issues maybe of common interest between the Planning Commission and the Advisory Board. And they both relate to what you know of as the 2024 periodic review, but it's a look at both regionally and locally the requirements that the city has now, not only to just plan for housing overall, but start to look in more detail at lower income housing and subsidized and supportive housing. So I'm going to start by letting Laura make her presentation, but just a heads up that that's where the focus is going to be going by the end of the discussion. And again, for the Community Service Advisory Board, maybe they can have some comments with you after the fact if there's any reactions to what they hear. So promoting Ms. Benjamin to be able to present.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Laura.
Thank you. It looks like I can't start my video, but hopefully folks can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Great. All right. I will go ahead and share my screen. Thank you all for having me. My name is Laura Benjamin. I'm a principal planner in our growth management division at the Puget Sound Regional Council. So I am here to talk about the housing policies in Vision 2050, our region's long-range plan for growth, as well as some other regional housing work we're doing to support local housing efforts. So this is a follow-up from the presentation you heard it in earlier meeting from Paul Ingram, who's our Director of Growth Management. And so, moving from that and focusing on housing. So the first few slides may look a little familiar just as a recap. So just, when we say the region, I'm going to say that a lot in the presentation. We're talking about the Central Puget Sound region, the 4 counties of King, Pierce, Snohomish, and Kitsap, 82 cities and towns, including the city of Lakewood, and just lots of different types of places. Also, a quick reminder, this is the planning framework. So we have the Growth Management Act at the state level. Then we have at the regional level, we have Vision 2050 and the multi-county planning policies that then translate into the countywide planning policies that then help to inform local comprehensive plans. So Vision 2050 is our region's long-range plan for growth. PSRC's General Assembly adopted the plan in late October 2020. And the plan, really why we were planning is because our region is growing. We have experienced historic growth over the past few decades, and we are anticipating more growth. Nearly 6 million people and just shy of 3.5 million jobs by the year 2050. So really need to think about coordinated and collaborative planning to accommodate new people and new jobs in a sustainable way. Vision 2050 includes several key policy themes, many that are very similar to what you would see in a local comprehensive plan. Today, we're going to be focusing on that top bullet, increasing housing choices and affordability. So when we started updating Vision 2050 back in 2018, our Growth Management Policy Board, which led the plan update process, told us that they wanted to have a laser focus on housing, that it was really a key issue for them during the update. So as staff, that is something we responded to. And the multi-county planning policies, or MPPs, in Vision 2050 kind of center around these 3 central themes. First, that is that housing is a regional issue. We see housing access and affordability and attainability issues in all communities across the region. These issues may look slightly different, but it's something all communities are struggling with. It's no longer just a big city issue or a Seattle issue, but we're seeing it across the region. And because of that, all communities have a role to play. Again, solutions and actions may look different in different places, but we see that all communities can do more to improve housing access and affordability. The second is that we see that housing is not in a vacuum. It's connected to access to transportation, to jobs in the economy, and to general overall quality of life. So when we think about where more housing should be built, where we want to preserve housing, we need to think about access to jobs, services, and other components of quality of life. And then finally, the third is that jobs housing balance is a key issue. We know we have jobs concentrations and we have housing concentrated not often near those jobs. So thinking about how we can provide opportunities for people to live and work in the same community if that's the choice they want to make. So in Vision 2050, it calls for the development of a regional housing strategy. So we'll talk about that now, what PSRC is doing to implement the housing policies in Vision 2050. So the regional housing strategy is a playbook of tools and actions to promote increased coordination and collaboration among jurisdictions. It's really a way to kind of promote best practices that we're seeing in jurisdictions, to encourage more jurisdictions to do that if it's the right fit. And also trying to find ways to coordinate and collaborate on some of those stickier, trickier issues where more than one jurisdiction and kind of an economy of scale is needed, where one jurisdiction couldn't tackle it on their own, but maybe through sub-regional coordination or partnership with other cities, more work can be done. So this graphic is really just meant to show kind of the relationship between Vision 2050, the region's long-range plan for growth, and the regional housing strategy, and how that kind of helps us to create a framework and inform local work, such as updates to the housing element and then housing needs assessments and comprehensive plans, as well as housing action plans, and then zoning and development regulations. So for the regional housing strategy, before we dive into the tools and actions in the strategies, just wanted to talk a little bit about what's informing the strategy and kind of how our growth management policy board and our executive board got to these strategies and actions to adopt. So the first is regional housing policies. So those would be the multi-county planning policies that are in Vision 2050. Also data, we spent over a year developing a regional housing needs assessment. This is the first time we had done that for the region. We'd done housing data work before, but this was the first time completing a full needs assessment. So really diving into the data to better understand what's going on and what we should anticipate for the future. And then the third and probably most important is we talked to people. We held focus groups, really focusing on people who are affected by housing access and affordability issues. We talked to some of the folks we normally talk to, like our policy boards and committees and some of the other policy wonks. And then we also realized that there's a broader housing sector out there, people who build for-profit housing, nonprofit housing, people in the finance sector, things like that. So we wanted to make sure that we were talking to those folks as well to better understand what they see as challenges and solutions. So really quickly, just a few key data points that to kind of highlight some of the things that are helping to inform the housing strategy. And the first is that we need more housing now. We see that the region is about 2 years behind in housing production. There's a lot going on in this chart, but just really quickly, the orange line is annual population change. The teal line is annual housing unit change. And you can see around that 2011 mark, we started to see population really increase, and housing didn't keep up. It was still feeling the effects of the Great Recession. And it wasn't until about 2016 that we saw housing production actually on par with growth. We also see that we need more housing in the future. Over the 20-year period between 2020 and 2050, the region needs more than 800,000 additional housing units to accommodate future growth. And you can see that broken out by the counties. And we also know that many of these housing units are going to need to be affordable to people in moderate and lower incomes. Our analysis shows that about 1/3 of housing units are going to need some level of public intervention or subsidy, whether that's a density bonus, some kind of zoning incentive, or flexible regulations, all the way to direct subsidy and funding. So now diving into the housing strategy itself, the strategy is organized around these 3 S's: supply, stability, and subsidy. Supply is really talking about, the amount and types of housing we have in communities across the region. Stability is looking at how we can provide housing and other community supports for people to, meet their needs and provide them the ability to stay in community if they choose. And then the third is subsidy. So that's really the money. So funding, financing, and ways to create and preserve units that the private market just isn't going to be able to have and pencil out. So quickly walking through these, for supply, the goal is to build more housing of different types. The strategy calls for things like building more multifamily housing near transit to allow more people the opportunity to live near high capacity transit, looking at more middle density housing, more flexible regulations to allow those types of housing that kind of bridge the gap in between detached single family and those more dense high-rise multifamily. And then how we can reduce the cost to build housing. We know building housing is really expensive. So thinking about ways, how can we work with the pipeline of employees in the construction industry? How can we look at permitting and fees to make sure that we can reduce costs as much as possible? For stability, the goal is to provide opportunities for residents to live in housing that meets their needs. The strategy calls for things like strengthening tenant assistance and protections to make sure that renters can continue to live in communities if they choose. Looking at how we can increase access to home ownership. This was something we heard quite a bit in the focus groups from a lot of renters, was that Their rent was significantly more than a mortgage payment would be, but because they were having to pay so much in rent, they couldn't save for a down payment. So they kind of felt like they were caught in this cycle of not being able to own a home. And then also things like how we can create and preserve long-term affordable housing using incentives, especially in higher growth, hotter market areas. And then finally, under subsidy, the goal here is to create and sustain long-term funding sources to create and preserve housing for very low income households and unhoused people. So this is really focused on residents where the private market just isn't going to provide units that meet their needs or their income levels. So here it's really about identifying funding from a variety of sources to increase affordable housing. Things like advocating for more funding from the state and federal government, how we can work with major employers, and also how can we make sure local governments are using the resources they have for local funding options. So all that to say, we heard from our Growth Management Policy Board during this that implementation is really critical. They didn't want this to just be a document that sits on a shelf. They wanted to make sure that the housing strategy is work we're doing regionally and also providing support at the local level. So the strategy includes an implementation section. It's broken into capacity, resources, and funding. When we talk to folks, those were kind of the clear breaks we were seeing. So capacity, like staffing, support, how can we take on more of this work? Resources, technical assistance, data, things like that. We know most staff don't have housing specific staff. They're land use planners wearing a housing hat. So how can we support those staff? And then funding, whether it be for additional staff, grant funding, things like that. So the implementation section has a section for PSRC, which we'll get to in a minute. Also calls out for work like for sub-regional agencies like SHAPE down in Pierce County, and then also things local jurisdictions can do as well. So really trying to provide a framework and support to move the housing strategy forward. So diving into what PSRC is doing to support the implementation of the regional housing strategy, 3 key things we're doing. One is monitoring. We actually just gave a presentation to our Growth Management Policy Board 2 weeks ago. So looking at data on performance and implementation to understand, is the needle moving? Where are there challenges and barriers? How can we provide support to address those? The second is the typology. So one thing we heard during the development of the strategy was that many jurisdictions felt like, there are often these laundry lists of things they can do around housing, and that realistically with, staff capacity, council agendas, things like that, they can probably only tackle 1 or 2 things a year. So having a better understanding of, what are those kind of potentially high impact things that could be done in a community would be really important. So we're working on developing a typology that identifies different types of places, and then the types of tools and actions that have the potential to make the greatest impact in those different types of places. And then the third thing, which is most directly tied to the comprehensive plan update, is plan review. So as you heard from Paul at a previous meeting about PSRC's plan review and certification process, we are developing resources and guidance and also bringing folks together to support the periodic comprehensive plan update. So just still diving a little bit deeper into what we're doing around the periodic comprehensive plan update, we have a draft housing element guide, which will be available later this month. We currently have a guide available that was updated in 2015, but we're updating it again to be more consistent with the updated state law for housing elements and needs assessments and to better reflect Vision 2050. We also are going to be hosting 2 housing-focused webinars as part of our Passport to 2044 comprehensive planning workshops. The first is actually next week on Wednesday, the 26th, both focusing on racially disparate impacts. That's a new part of the Growth Management Act's requirements for housing elements. And then we'll be having a second session in February focusing on how to assess and accommodate need for housing. And then the third thing is the plan review manual. It's really kind of the one-stop shop for all things plan review and certification. Has a housing checklist. It includes the pages there and a link to that. To help us kind of scope and provide a framework for what staff and our boards will be looking for in a housing element and housing needs assessment when the plans go through the plan review and certification process. So that is the end of my presentation. I will stop sharing, but my contact information is there, and I'm happy to chat offline if folks have other questions, and happy to answer any questions now.
Thank you, Laura. Does anyone have any questions? No? Mr. Wagman?
Yep. I have a couple. Thank you. That's a good brief. We have to have a plan. I see some of these where they say we're going to grow, but what happens if we don't grow? What happens if it goes the other way? What do we do?
Yeah, so in terms of what PSRC is looking for in a comprehensive plan is really that a jurisdiction is planning for the growth, not that the growth actually occurs. So really, when it comes to housing, it's making sure that a city is, planning to accommodate the growth, has the capacity for the growth target that was set through the Pierce County Regional Council's target setting process. And, if there are things specifically for markets that aren't growing quite as fast, we're happy to talk more. The typology will also be a tool that can help to better identify different resources, tools, and actions for different types of markets. That might be something to look into in the future as well.
Okay, and then on your very close to the end of the slides there, you talked about a webinar that's coming up, racially disparate impacts. What are we talking about there?
Yes, so that's a term that's used now in the state law and the Growth Management Act that was updated through House Bill 1220 back in 2021. So really, it's now saying that plans need to look at current and historic policies and systems that have resulted in kind of differences we're seeing in home ownership by race and ethnicity, by income and wealth, things like that. We know right now that that a white household is about 3 times more likely to own a home than a Black household in our region. So it's really asking jurisdictions to kind of dig into past policies to see if there's anything they can pinpoint, not to say that that they'll find something per se, but looking at data, looking at policies to better understand how moving forward comprehensive plan policies can ensure that we're supporting housing access and affordability for all people.
Well, in 2008, when they started giving loans to people that really shouldn't have qualified, and they did, and we really messed things up there. So the question is what kind of solutions do we have without putting people in a real financial jam where you loan money that there's no hope of that ever being repaid. So do we gift some of those things? I know you had some things where you're looking for support donors or people on the other side. The thing that I like the best is I'm spacing on it now, but they down in Tillicum, they put housing where they help the people build a house and let them move in, and save some things. To me, that's kind of the way we should go. And I guess if we have more discussion on that, that'll work. But when we try to get too much government involved in the 2008 crash, I think we created our own problem. And so we really, so I think it's good that we've had this discussion. I think we need to continue, and it's good to have a plan. But there's some hard questions that need to be answered from my perspective.
Thanks. Mr. Buer?
For Ms. Benjamin, as well as the audience and the commission members, city staff knew the issue of housing was going to be one of the more crucial issues within the update. So we've actually started early on it. We do now have a needs assessment, a draft needs assessment that's been completed, which myself and Tiffany received very recently, as well as some draft implementation measures that talk about these specific issues. I'm in some general discussion with the city manager on how we're going to do this, as well as implementation. Ms. Spear has been putting together a detailed schedule of how we're going to go through each one of these items. So you're going to have a very busy 2023 and 2024 with the goal to have this completed by 2024. But housing will be one of the primary aspects behind this comprehensive plan update. And stay tuned. We know this is going to be a tough nut to crack, and that's why we started early. So FYI.
I
Thank
don't
you.
know if Tiffany would like to add any more, but that's how I set my point.
Ms. Spear?
If Ms. Benjamin doesn't have any other questions, I can move on to my presentation. I just don't know if there's anything else.
Yep. Any other comments on this topic? Don't see or hear any. Thank you, Ms. Benjamin, for the presentation. And Tiffany, you can go.
Thank you. I will share my screen now if I can. One second. All right. So forgive me, I have too many technical things at once. Okay, here we go. So as you remember from last meeting, members of the Planning Commission, anytime you see this logo with the 2024 in front of the city logo, this is the big one. This is what we're talking about for the next 2 years. And for the community, Services Advisory Board, this is going to be, I think, some issues of common interest with you and your purview as an advisory board. This is the second time we've brought housing to you. So continuing, if you recall, last meeting, we had Paul Ingram talking to you. We had some information that came from a draft version of the housing needs assessment presented to you. We have a little bit of updated data for you tonight, but also just wanted to go through some additional information now that you've heard also from Laura Benjamin. And again, PSRC is the one that creates the multi-county planning policies, which in then terms feed into countywide, which come down to our city comprehensive plan and our development regulations. So she was the top level administration, if you will, under the Growth Management Act. And here you see it in graphic form. So GMA drops down into the multi-county, the countywide planning policies, and then the city's comp plan and land use regulations. We do have until the end of 2024 to complete the work, not only on housing, but all of the elements for the 2024 review. And what you see there in the bottom two bullet points is that the Department of Commerce, who we had last time as well with Ann Fritzel and Shane Hope were here, providing guidance first and foremost, but also reviewing just for consistency with the Growth Management Act. If there is a situation where someone were to challenge what the city adopts, ultimately, it goes to the Growth Management Policy Board. Commerce is not involved with that, but they are giving us guidance and feedback as to whether we're consistent prior to adoption. PSRC is actually doing that certification process. And what they're doing is looking first and foremost at transportation, meaning are the items within the comp plan update consistent with GMA, multi-county planning policies, and down the line. And if they're not, if they find that we actually are not ready to be certified, then that affects the ability for the city to apply for federal transportation dollars that flow through the PSRC. So that's the teeth. Sometimes people ask that question, but that's the teeth. So here we go. A lot of information on the screen. I'll spend a little bit of time here. And yes, you can see my mouse. Okay. So we've got updated numbers that came out of this process by which we're not only now as a city planning for the total number of people by 2044, but it's now being broken out by income band. And so you'll see this up here is circled method A, and then down at the bottom, you see method B. We aren't sure exactly yet which one of these will ultimately be used, but it is a countywide process. Some sausage making needs to occur. And then by next spring, we'll know whether we're going by the method A or the method B numbers. But both of them give you the outcomes, as you see here, of a total number of units and then broken out by income band. So for instance, this is method A on top, 982 non-permanent supportive housing, meaning no supportive services go along with this. This is just units available for people to occupy that are at the 0 to 30% of area median income. Permanent supportive housing means that it is that income band, and in addition to that, there are human and social services provided to those tenants. And what you see in method A is that Lakewood is being told 982 of the units you plan for over the next 24 years or so need to be for without the services, and 1,580 would need to be with those services. Then you jump up into your next income band. So from the 30 to 50% area median income, about 1,600. 50 to 80% AMI is about 1,400. smaller numbers here, but 80 to 100%, which is really where the market rate housing starts to come in. If it's below 80% AMI, generally speaking, that's not going to be a private developer. That's going to be nonprofits, heavily subsidized construction for anything lower than that. And then at the 100 to 120% plus, about 600 there. You will also notice that this new calculation and way of calculating housing need also identifies emergency housing. And what this first methodology is saying is that about 555 units would be needed in the city of Lakewood. Right now, LASA is the main provider of emergency housing in the city itself. We also have our partnership in Aspen Court, which is just outside city limits for some emergency shelter. That asset's going to basically go away at the end of 23 because it's being transferred out of emergency shelter into permanent supportive housing. So all of these numbers, I'm not going to go through in as much detail, but you'll see in method B, it's a little bit different just because of the way it's calculated, but you see multiple thousands of 0 to 30. There's actually, the way this is calculated is not saying get rid of these units, it's just saying you don't need to do as many. And then between 80 to 100, about 1,700, 1,800 for 100 to 120 AMI plus, and it actually concludes that some additional emergency need housing units are needed. This bottom part is a comparative thing, just showing that under method A, less is needed in this compared to B. Reverse that for the next two income bands between A and B, and on it goes up. So to reiterate in a slightly different way, what this data is doing is showing to the city of Lakewood, up until this big 10-year review of our comp plan, it was City X, Lakewood included, you have to plan for so many more housing units over the next 20 years. This time around, because of state law, through those regional planning policies down to the city, we're saying not only do you have that number, but we now are saying that they need to be targeted towards certain economic impact bands, or economic bands, excuse me. And so these are the numbers, and again, they are at this point still draft. We don't know which one of these will ultimately be the tool that we have to use. But just to get your head around the idea that we are going to be doing this extra step and extra focus on different housing income bands. Yes, sir.
I'm having a hard time tracking with the percentage of area medium income. What in here is, would be considered like middle class housing? Any of this?
Probably the 80 to 120.
Just right. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
So any other questions on this? I know this is a very complicated slide with lots of stuff on it. You'll see it again, I guarantee
I
it.
figured you're gonna go on and have other stuff, so I hate to ask questions you're gonna answer.
Okay. So this will tie into a little bit more about what I was just referring to in terms of past planning. The growth targets that the city participated in negotiating and then the Pierce County Council adopted earlier this year said that there were about 9,700 housing units. Then that could be a single family detached home up to an apartment unit, any type of housing unit between now and 2044. The buildable lands report, if you'll recall, came out last year, and that's just saying how much capacity do you have for additional growth within your city, is about 11,370 units. How those units are defined, vacant parcels, either multi or single unit, just a few there. Most of them are on underutilized sites. And we talked about this a bit at the last meeting where Lakewood has a lot of quote capacity, but it's not greenfield. It's not virgin land that hasn't been developed on at all. Most of it, about 78%, is on land that's already been developed in some way and would need to be densified in order to accommodate all of these 11,000 theoretical units that this buildable lands report found. And most of the capacity is in multifamily rather than single family zoned areas of the city. So if you look at this map, this obviously is the city of Lakewood. These are the areas in the city where residential development of some kind can happen. The yellow is the single family residential zone, so residential 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then the lighter brown is mixed residential, which is I'll just call it an intermediary zone, if you will. Multifamily, the dark brown. And then in neighborhood, business, and commercial, there are actually opportunities to include some higher density housing as well. So one of the main things you'll see on this map is that the eastern side of the city is white. That is the area that is either industrially zoned, meaning no housing at all, or it's part of the clear zone area, the accident potential zone areas where no residential development is allowed. Everything that's residential on that part of the city is non-conforming right now. And that is all tied to the safety concerns regarding North McCord Field flight patterns and the risk for danger there. This is just another map which shows the zoning broken out a little bit more. And again, the Rs are residential 1 through 4. You see on the right-hand side there, the density that's currently allowed in each one of those zones. And then you'll also see everything from CBD, the central business district here in the downtown, to open space and recreation, industrial, et cetera, in different parts of the city. So these are some questions, and I'm sorry I can't show you the top slide, but essentially this is saying where you see highlighted are where certain types of housing units are not currently allowed, or they are conditionally allowed. So for instance, under R1, no 2-family, 3-family, or multifamily units are allowed, whether conditionally or outright. Same is true for R2 and R3. 2-family residential is currently allowed conditionally in R4. And then in, MR1 and MR2, conditional use for 3-family. Multifamily is not allowed in any one of those zones. So the question to ask as part of this big, huge housing discussion over the next year and a half, 2 years, is whether any of that should change or whether the reasons why that is the current status quo are legit and need to be maintained, because there are reasons for this. It's not just picked out of a hat, but looking at that and figuring out if any of that needs to change in order to be responsive to this need to plan for not only the number of houses, but the types of housing unit and at what income band they're designed for. So any questions on that? Okay. We'll continue with our 24 comprehensive plan review information on the next 3 planning commission meetings, November 2nd, 16th, and December 7th. You see there the different topics up, and we will continue to have little guest speakers, if you will. This time though, we're turning to our local department managers here at the city. So for instance, on November 2nd, you'll hear from our Parks and Rec Director, Mary Dodsworth. November 16th will be Becky Newton, our Economic Development Manager, and December 7th will be the Public Works Engineering Director, Paul Busich. But if I could, since we do have members of the Community Service Advisory Board here tonight, and looking at all of this economic analysis now to all of these different income bands, what we're talking about here is continuing a number of the existing housing programs that the CSAB actually helps to fund or recommend funding for. The Rental Housing Safety Program, the CDBG and home funding that funnels through the city out for either repair of existing housing or actually allowing for some new construction. There's work that I think what Mr. Wagman was referring to earlier with Habitat for Humanity that's ongoing here in the city to provide for affordable housing that people actually invest in through sweat equity. So all of those things are going to help with not only planning for this new way of planning, but also explaining the position that the city takes to emphasize preservation of existing housing as a way to provide affordable units, not just construction of new housing. There are a number of jurisdictions where really the focus is on new construction only, and Lakewood's not like that. Lakewood says, hey, we've got a lot of housing now that if we make sure it's maintained and is habitable and safe, that is the affordable housing within the city, or a major component of it. So with that, I will stop sharing and turn it back to you, Mr. Chair.
Anyone have any questions?
So in the studies, what is our target for home ownership? And is that what level of a factor is that? Because when it says affordable and low income and so on, that applies to purchase, but also to rental, and it doesn't differentiate on there. Is that divided up anywhere in any
I have not come across yet anything that says you have to have this much home ownership and this much rental housing units in your city. It is a matter of bending the curve, if you will, over time to increase the share, particularly for people of color, to increase the number who are able to own whatever home they're living in. But there's not a hard target. There's not a hard percentage split.
Then is there any factoring in what you guys have looked at so far related to just the apartments or rentals versus home ownership?
You mean
As far as
data?
What the split is on when we say creating more units, for how much of that is apartments, how much of that is home ownership?
That's really a decision for the city to be making in this process, because it is planning for the number of units, being responsive to this idea of planning for the various income bands. And then actually, as Mr. Wagaman was referring to, once upon a time when it was zero down, et cetera, you ended up with people that maybe for the short term could maintain and afford the home they were purchasing, but then over time they weren't able to keep it. So looking at realistically, given a person's income, does it make sense to think that they're going to end up owning versus renting? And assuming the assumptions made are reasonable, you're going to end up with people that will always rent. You'll have maybe some new people joining into the home ownership group, and hopefully that will include more people of color over time. But that is an individualized city discussion.
Sounds good. I guess I would just say the home ownership average in the United States hovers around 65 to 70%, depending on where you're at.
Right.
I imagine nationwide, it's around 67 or so still. Maybe it's a little higher right now, but so maybe using that as our benchmark, as far as how we're going to split that up and trying to solve it, because they aren't the same thing. We could solve this by just saying, build a bunch of apartments. That's not really the best thing for us. And having everyone have a house, that's great, but for the same reason you just indicated, it's actually not everyone is meant to be a homeowner. And when you get over a certain percentage, it becomes a high risk for not just the whole market, but the city, because we are the market in that essence. So maybe we just put something in there, and not saying this would be a hard number, but approximately this split or range, so that we have an idea of. The reason I say that is because if we're trying to add more housing and we're doing single family and density and increasing it, it's helpful to know here's where we could put some single family or up zoning or something like that. And then if we're adding more multifamily, that too is okay. And now how do we try and open things up so we can more strategically do it rather than just where it's currently zoned, which compounds a problem we're already trying to battle against.
Yeah, and one thing, if I could too, the historic split between home ownership and rental in Lakewood is not the 60-40 that you see even countywide. It's the opposite.
Yeah.
So right now, the number of people renting is higher than the number of people owning here in the city of Lakewood, and it's about a 40-60.
Yeah.
And so whether that can be changed over time by increasing the number of units available to buy, maybe that changes that percentage in some respect. It's also just the demographic of the city and the economics realities of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's going to be, certainly the decisions that are made in Lakewood are going to be unique and not the same as Tacoma or anywhere else in the county.
Mr. Bureau?
Since we track the number of rentals through the rental housing safety program in the city of Lakewood, it's roughly between 12,000 and 14,000 rentals. Many of those are single family rentals, by the way. So immediately after COVID, and when the skyrocketing rates went up in housing prices, a lot of those single family rentals became homeowner occupied houses. So that was a unique aspect to Lakewood, and we were able to track that. So the numbers can change, although I would agree with Tiffany, you're looking historically at a 40-60 split.
Yeah, then maybe it's not maybe it's not the 66, maybe it's something that bridges us closer to the norm from where we're at now. But it's important we're mindful of that, because otherwise we're just creating an ambiguous goal that could be solved with one or the other, which doesn't really give us what we're looking for in the end.
And to keep in mind too, growth management has 14 goals, all of which are supposed to be of equal importance. So we have a focus, and we've been talking about housing for a couple of things, but transportation, employment, environment, all kinds of other up to 14 things are all supposed to be at the same level of importance in planning. And so just as important as for housing anyway, is the jobs that are available for people to be working in, and then their income goes up and then they can make other housing choices, right? So the city will also be looking at housing and then transportation options between housing and jobs as part of this process, and they all blend into each other.
And then I had a question, when you were talking about the buildable lands report, kind of, I don't know, just something came to me. I assume that takes into account like critical areas and things like that on parcels. And, you know, we've been going, you know, I think it's still at council with the white oak trees and how, you know, that could drastically change, you know, what we have considered as buildable homes and, you know, one way or the other, really. So,
Yes, the buildable lands report has within it for each jurisdiction assumptions that are made about things that just are out of the picture altogether, whether it's because they are a critical area or it's a critical area buffer or it's a road. And so the calculations made in the most recent one for us, which was 2021, the next time they do it, there might be some different assumptions because there is this new tree preservation focus in the code. And the canopy goal that the city council now wants to adopt, which is at 40%. So that may affect how much land just gets removed from the buildable stuff to begin with. And then the capacity calculation would have to reflect that.
so then our numbers from, you know, the Pierce County Regional Council, they would be less. We would have less units that we would have to meet, or how does that,
This wouldn't.
is that a
the-
different thing?
Yeah,
I
the
guess?
tree changes or other environmental changes, for instance, with the flooding discussion that the city council is also looking at right now regarding Clover Creek, that wouldn't be reflected and rippled up and rippled back down for 10 years, I
Okay,
would say.
all right, thanks.
Yep.
Any other questions or comments on this topic? Okay.
If I could, Mr. Chair?
Yep.
If there's anything that would be of interest or something that the Community Service Advisory Board members would like to say on any of this, or if there's nothing else here that you would be interested in listening to, you're welcome to go. No need to stay.
Critical area, critical wetlands or the buffer zone. 20-year dark ocean something about. Just the white oak.
I'm Mike Lackady. I've been on this board for, seems like 100 years. I just want to make sure that you all understand we're reactionary. You know, we have to respond, our funding through requests that we get from, you know, our citizens. And it's all done in accordance with the city council strategies. So there's not really much we can do as an organization, you know, for housing. This year we had requests for $591,000, and we only have, I think, ended up with $405,000 or something like that to fund. So, you know, we do some housing repairs and some emergency housing with LASA and stuff like that. But as far as us being able to, you know, build Habitat for Humanity, that's what you were referring to in Tilcom. You know, that's a great program that should be explored a little bit more. But anyway, I just want to make sure you knew that we don't have $1 million to give you to build houses with. Okay.
Thank you, sir. All right, if there's nothing else, that'll conclude the new business, and we will go back to public hearing for the 2023 comprehensive plan docket. And this is continued from October 5th. And I think that we kept it open to get some written comments in there. Is that what?
Yes, Mr. Chair, because of technical difficulties at the last meeting, if you remember, we were in the other room and there were some issues with allowing a full virtual participation. You decided to keep it open until noon today. I'm not aware of any Okay, no other written comments were submitted, so the record that you saw by the end of the 5th meeting is what you have in front of you as you talk about now 23 docket action.
Okay. So with that, would staff recommend closing the comment period?
Yes,
Okay.
please.
So the public hearing for the 2023 comprehensive plan docket will be closed.
Thank you.
We need a
Yeah.
motion on that.
I don't believe so. No. Okay, unfinished action. And action on recommendation for the 2023 comprehensive plan docket. That's
Yes.
what we just,
Yes. So, Mr. Chair, included in your packet tonight was a draft ordinance that if you're ready to do so, you would take action on to make a recommendation to the city council on the list of amendments to include in the 2023 comprehensive plan update docket. So I will walk through this quickly, and then it's up to you to decide if you're ready to take that action this evening or if you want to take another meeting. It's totally up to you. If you recall, there were 8 total applications. 4 of them came from private parties and 4 were initiated by the city itself. So what you see here is just a quick summary and then what the department is saying at this point about whether or not to include it on the list. So the first application was to rezone a single parcel located at 8821 John Dower Road Southwest from multifamily 1 to commercial 1. This, for a couple of reasons, is not recommended to be included in the comprehensive plan amendment packet or docket list. First of all, it is a single parcel, which by definition means it's a site-specific rezone, and that has its own separate process to apply for a rezone through a different part of the Title 18A, the Development Code of the city. But also, this is the map for this one. Just to show you, the star is where the parcel is. It is a non-conforming use. It pre-exists the incorporation of the city. So it was alive and well before Lakewood became Lakewood. As the zoning was placed around it by the city, it is different and commercial in nature as opposed to the rest of that around it that is residential. But it is non-conforming under the code, which means it can continue to operate. And even if it were sold, it could continue to operate without any zoning change. If they wanted to pursue a site-specific rezone, they would go through a separate process that ultimately goes through the hearing examiner. But otherwise, this is up to you. The Planning Commission could include this. It's just the department is saying that based on the way it's laid out in our development code, this would not be something that would work in a comprehensive plan amendment. The second one is to rezone several parcels from multifamily 3 to the downtown business district. This is one that the Planning Commission talked about at length at the last meeting, and I'll show a map for that in just a moment. The third is rezoning a number of parcels from mixed residential 1 to open space and recreation. This is the racket club that wanted at one point to develop these lots, and then they've changed focus and want to use them now actually to develop 6 new tennis courts. The fourth is a number of rezones again for the development of low-income housing. This came in from LASA. This is part of their multi-phase development of not only a hygiene center, which is already underway, but then additional low-income housing units right around where their offices are located. The 4 that were applications coming from the city. One is to allow permanent supportive housing and transitional housing in the city's commercial zones. This is being required by state law. The 6th is to just do kind of a technical change that's happened in the amount, or I'm sorry, the type of funding that can be used for relocation assistance. It no longer needs to be federal, it could be any type. So that's what that amendment shows. The 7th is a 1 parcel change for open space recreation. And that is for inclusion in Wards Lake Park. And then 8 is, and I'm sorry, that is a parcel that's immediately adjacent to the existing Wards Lake Park. The 8th is the update of text in the comprehensive plan now that the Western State Hospital Master Plan is done and we're just awaiting the end of the appeal period, finally being able to update our comprehensive plan to reflect what's now going to be happening at Western State Hospital. If you were to take action tonight, you would be looking at the City Council beginning its review on November 7th and moving through to action presumably on December 5th. And then we do our usual substantive reviews back in front of you next spring. So, sorry, let me go to these maps really quickly to help bring this back into focus. This is the one that is 3 parcels immediately adjacent to the downtown area. When the Planning Commission talked about this at the meeting on the 5th, there was a sentiment, I think, that was held by most, if not all of you, that instead of it just being those 3 parcels right here, it was to look at actually this whole line of parcels, which are also immediately adjacent to the downtown, and rezone them as well. And also this MF1 section here. So this whole, I don't know, I'll call it a lamb chop or a thigh bone, whatever. I'm hungry. All of this being rezoned to central business district and having the boundaries of the downtown sub-area be reflected in that change as well. The open space and recreation racquetball request, you see these starred parcels are the ones that it would all affect.
Can you go back to the previous one next to the
Sure.
city? So that wasn't included in this though. Was it?
What was originally applied for by the the developer, the owner of these 3 parcels was just that these 3
Yeah.
would be rezoned. And the idea coming back from the city as well as your own discussion was to actually expand that redrawing of the line and rezoning to include this whole line of parcels immediately to the west of this, and then also south. So this whole part would then become part of the downtown sub-area as well and subject to those development regulations and zoning.
Is that in here as
Yes.
the recommendation? Okay.
That is what's included in the draft ordinance, yes. We already talked about racquetball. This is the 4 parcels that have been requested for rezoning by LASA. The City Community and Economic Development Department does recommend that this happen. This is to continue the multi-phase development of what's called Gravelly Lake Commons by LASA. We mentioned briefly that state law is now requiring this additional change here of allowing permanent supportive and transitional housing in the commercial zones. So this is simply an action to comply with that requirement. The policy change is removing 3 words out of that one section of the comp plan. This is the one parcel in teal here that's immediately adjacent towards Lake Park, doing a rezone there to allow the expansion of the park and including that parcel. And the city does own that parcel already. And then finally, again, the Western State Hospital policy changes, text changes in the comprehensive plan now that that is done. So the motion, if you were ready to take it tonight after you discussed this, would be to approve the resolution and forward it to the council. I will again say that the ordinance as of now does not include that first one. So if you want to drop the first request in that the Community and Economic Development Department did not recommend, you would just need to make an oral amendment to include that tonight, and we would do so.
Thank you. Yep, Mr. Estrada.
In the attachment A, the resolution that you prepared.
Yep.
Under 2023-02, I don't see the expanded parcels that you were talking about. Am I reading that incorrectly? Page 9.
You're right, Mr. Estrada. I apologize. This should have significantly more parcels, and somewhere on my directory at my office, they're there. They're just not in your packet this evening. So if you would like, we can bring this back to you at the next meeting with all of those corrections.
Okay.
How far over does it go? It's a lamb chop that ends at what point?
It ends at Wildair. There's a drive and a court that kind of loop around right next to each other.
Does it, I mean, how many more parcels is there that we don't see?
It's roughly 15, and I apologize. This should have been in the stuff for you tonight.
We could still be friends.
Okay, thank you.
While you're looking that up, would it be okay to ask, what would be is there any reason that we would be vehemently opposed to the first one that because it seemed to me that everyone agreed that it's been existing for so long at this point, what good does it do to hold on to that old zoning? Is there a reason that we're going to try and revert back and try and push that to a family zoning or?
No, that would not be the suggestion by, or recommendation from the department. The department would be just to say, leave it alone. It is a non-conforming use that can continue to operate. The reason it's not being recommended by the department is because per code and state law, that's not the way you would handle that type of a rezone. It needs to be done through a site-specific rezone process rather than the comp plan amendment.
Right.
And the reason that's different from these other ones is because
The other ones are multiple parcels.
multiple.
Yeah.
parcels. Okay.
I would just also state that right now it's illegal non-conforming use has been discussed. He could not expand, he could repair, such things like that. If he goes to a site specific, he could have commercial zoning for that lot only. And then that could potentially be a conforming use, but that's a different process that goes to the hearing examiner, not to the planning commission and city council.
Yeah, I guess yeah, if that's the one reason, then it would be fine. To me, keeping a non-conforming use on something that is like that is, in my opinion, not healthy for the business owner or for the property owner, because even though you can repair, the ability to transfer the equity or the project or to do the things you need to do to be able to continue to grow that business can be very difficult, whether it's right there or whether it's, on the other side of town, you're going to run into the same problems. And I've had a non-conforming use property, financing, insurance, everything is very different on those. And so if it's been that way for that long and we really don't object to it, I think that's something that I would encourage them to go through that hearing examiner's approach and do it. And I would encourage us to accept it because it's obviously that's something we should
Yeah.
have.
And just to be crystal clear, this recommendation coming from the department is not that it's a bad idea, it's that this is the wrong process. So asking that they would be considering going.
And
through
that's
the
why
other
I
one.
was trying to clarify. I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
And in perfect candor, I gave the property owner bad advice because I misunderstood the difference between site-specific rezoning and a comprehensive plan amendment. So there's ownership on this, and so I apologize.
We're all in it.
I like this conversation. So we just want to make sure that we're going to be helpful to them saying, hey, this is the way you should do it.
What I'm going to recommend to the city council is that their fees that are being used for the comprehensive plan amendment, did they file for them? No, okay, never mind. But if they had paid the fees, that we would use those fees for the site-specific rezone. So they're really not out of any money for applications at this point.
Okay.
So to get back to your question, Mr. Combs, regarding the other application, you'll see this down here. This is the line of parcels we're talking about. It's all residential at this point. They have not been notified about any of this yet, this conversation. This has been, the property owner of these adjacent 3 parcels came to you and it's been advertised as part of this process. But these property owners have not had, hey, guess what? If this goes into the docket and it does include that additional number of parcels, they would get notice right away that this is something that's being considered, explaining to them the process if they want to engage and say yes or no to it. And just to be clear as well, even if they were rezoned, their parcels can remain unchanged and they can live there as long as they want to with no effect at all to their property.
And I'm totally on board with it. I think that's a good change to do it in blocks that make sense, rather than just little tiniest of pockets. I was just curious on that side that goes off to the left, if that is the last parcel, if it continues on.
This is the last parcel. There is a road right there.
Okay, gotcha.
And this is Main Street. So City Hall is, I think this right here. Here we are.
Yeah.
So this is Wildair and this is Wildair Court because Wildair Drive is a little bit further to the west.
And just to be clear now, you're saying that there's no adverse impact to any of these residents, to them now or to their descendants?
Anyone living in their house right now Nothing would change unless and until they wanted to do something different with the property and look to see what they could do. Whether it's they want to change the use to allow a duplex, to allow something of higher density, or whether somebody looking to purchase the property, if they wanted to do something different with it, CBD, that zone, Central Business District, would have a different allowed number of uses and types of uses than just, what would this be? I think it's R4 or R3 right now.
It's more of an opportunity for them to further develop their property.
Correct. It would expand the number of types of things they could do with the property.
Okay.
So is there any, there hasn't been notice to these parcels. Is there any issues with, closing the public comment here? I guess they would have the opportunity at council to comment.
They will have opportunity this fall just to set the docket, but they will have the entire actual review of this application come to you next spring and then to the council as well. So
Okay.
this is just saying we're even going to talk about it. We're
Oh,
creating the
okay.
list.
Okay.
Next year will be the actual analysis.
We're not making, we're just putting forward a proposal. Whether or not you accept it as a recommendation in 2023 is yet to be determined.
Okay. Can we get these parcel? I mean, it seems like it's all pretty completed and I just assume, make a motion and move on with it. If we could get these parcels, as part of 2023-02.
Absolutely. We can do it that way if you're comfortable with it. I do have them identified in the correct version of the ordinance, which unfortunately is not in front of you this evening. So again, my apologies.
I have a question on 05.
Yep, Mr. Shaw.
Regarding 05. So as I understand it, the Candlewood hotel has already been designated. And is that correct? And also been purchased by the city for transitional housing?
Candlewood Suites is a hotel along South Tacoma Way. It is, if it has not already been purchased, it's on its way to being purchased by Lehigh, which is the Low Income Housing Institute. And they've expressed to the city that they intend to run it as transitional housing, which they could do right now because state law allows that. But what this is doing is saying City of Lakewood is going to now comply with the state law 35A 21430, that you have to allow not only transitional, but permanent supportive.
Okay.
However, as we go through the whole process in 2023, the council and the commission will have the opportunity to talk about the spacing of these facilities so you don't have one on top of the other. So that's an important aspect of this draft code that's coming forward that we haven't really gotten into the details. Council and the commission could also determine the density, the actual number of units in these facilities. That might be difficult to do given the fact that people are purchasing these with existing number of units, and to reduce the number of units may prove to be a bit of a challenge and problematic for all parties. So stay tuned for more on that one.
You'll see at the bottom of this slide, Mr. Estrada, where it starts to talk about per the same statute, you can have conditions put on it by the city.
Yes.
So that would be part of this as well.
Reasonable occupancy, spacing, and et cetera, yes.
Yeah.
Got it.
Any other comments, questions? concerns?
Thank you.
I had just one. I think I just wanted to encourage, the city as we come up with these opportunities to expand the business corridor and items like that are thought of, or if we get more applications, I think it's a great thing if we can do that and, have central amenities for folks around those areas. So just an encouragement for us to think about where else we can do this if an opportunity arises.
Thank you. So with that, I would be looking for a motion for this 2023 comprehensive plan docket. Can you put the language back up?
Yes,
there?
I'm sorry. Absolutely.
Makes it easier.
Forgive me.
I'll make a motion that we adopt resolution 2022-08, resolution of the Planning Commission of the City of Lakewood, recommending the City Council 2023.
Yep.
If you
Mr.
want me to
Combs,
read the whole thing, I can, but hopefully I
A
can.
second.
Mr. Wagaman with the second.
Subject to the addition of those parcels we just talked about.
And so to clarify, if that's the consensus of the group, what this would include then is not the first one. It would not be part of the docket. The second one would have the additional parcels discussed adjacent to, okay.
correct?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, say nay. Okay. Moves, or the motion moves to, I guess, passes.
Motion is adopted.
Motion is adopted. Words are tough. Okay, so that takes care of our unfinished business. And the final item 9 here, reports from council, city staff, and commission.
Councilmember Boki's not here. I don't know, Mr. Buer, if you have anything you wanted to.
The city council considered the tree preservation code last Monday evening. I would say they appear to be this close to adopting. It's coming back for action on November the 7th. There's some minor wordsmithing that they requested. We're going through that process, and that's the anticipated date of adoption. If it is adopted, staff has requested that the council defer actual implementation until March the 1st, 2023, to give us the opportunity to get all the pieces in place to bring forward this new code with new regulations. The other topic is that the city council adopted the climate change work plan. They added one additional item, which was the incorporation of urban forestry program. We've already started work on that. And hopefully we will have a work plan or some specific details for the council to take a look at about the May or June timeframe. So that's the latest action, and I can see that one of the commission members has a question.
Yep.
Okay, I was just curious on that. Have they expressed any, with the goal of 40%, did they talk about how that was going to be achieved with the amount of acreage it is expected?
No.
That was something that we talked about at
Yeah.
great length, and so I'm
It-
very, very curious what that outcome
It's a
was.
goal. I'll put it to you that way.
Okay,
And it's something that when we come back through urban forestry program, we would talk about percentages of increase, and the council can look at the measurements and see, are we meeting that goal, or is something different need to be done? But the forestry program would attempt to address that question.
So was that a change, Mr. Buer? Didn't we recommend 30 and the council decided 40? Is that correct?
I believe that's correct. The council did increase the percentage based upon public comment.
Do you have any other, like, just, 10,000 foot level kind of it's quite a bit different than what we had recommended. Could you go over a couple of the substantive changes?
Not off the top of our heads.
No.
But we can get that to you next
As
meeting.
I can go.
It's a
watch
pretty
that.
dense code.
Yeah.
You've got to be very careful about how you read it. They did talk at great length about utilities. Utilities have been exempted,
Okay.
but we did incorporate standards, forestry standards for the use of that.
You know where they ended up with the single tree critical area? Is that,
A single tree is not a critical area. It's 2 or more. You have to
Okay.
have a stand.
okay,
With
stand,
2 or more, yeah.
okay.
They went with a 10,000 square foot lot minimum. If it's 10,000 square feet or less, it's exempt unless it has a Oregon white oak on it.
which was existing.
Yeah. And keep in mind that, the example that I use, if you have a 15-inch Gary oak that you want removed on the property, if it absolutely has to go, you're going to pay $10,000 into an impact fee or a tree fund program for the city. And then that's your level of compensation at this time. So the city goes out and then uses that money to plant all kinds of trees in the city of Lakewood, but not specific to Gary oak because it takes too long to grow Gary oak unless the city council chooses to use the tree fund to acquire land that does have Gary oak on it.
Those fees were those fees in there? Like, I guess.
Those fees that I just gave are what we currently use.
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
But the council is looking at amending the fee schedule for Gary oak in mid-November.
Okay.
The total fee structure for tree permits in mid-November, not just Gary oak.
So to cut a single 15-inch Gary oak would be like a $10,000 fee.
That's what I recall. Let me go back and do my math. But
Yeah. I mean, either way, that's, if it's more than like 2 or 4 or 5,000, that seems quite a bit.
I wouldn't have voted for that. That's for sure.
yeah, the goal is, if it's not in the middle of your lot, which is where you're putting your structure, if it's on the side, do what you can to keep
Yeah,
it.
okay.
And if you do keep the trees, there's a whole bunch of standards and incentives for property owners.
Okay.
And there's still the requirements that if there's just too many on the site and, you want to build a 1,500 square foot home, there's an exemption process for that as well.
So I thought that it was like, if you cut a tree down, you had to replant, not that you had to pay a penalty.
You can if you want to,
Oh,
but sometimes there's just not enough space on the land
Gotcha,
to
okay.
plant the trees.
yeah, to plant the 30 inches of trees or whatever. Yeah.
Because it's a lot of trees in some situations.
Yeah, like, it wasn't it twice the.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it'd be 30 inches of,
And if you're buying trees at 3-inch caliper,
yeah. they're
that's
not
10
cheap.
trees.
Okay.
I wouldn't want 10 trees on my lot. I've got enough trees.
Okay. Anything else? Is that it?
Just the next meeting will be November 2nd. We'll continue the 2024 discussion. And we will bring back to you a summary of what happened with both climate change and hopefully the tree code. So you just can know what happened with that at the city council level.
Okay, thanks. Well, with
Uh,
that, oh,
Just for clarification, we're coming up in the holiday season, Tiffany, so we do plan on having 2 meetings in November and only 1 meeting in December. Is that
Correct.
right? Okay.
what are the dates on those?
It'll be the 1st and 3rd of November, so the 2nd and then the 16th. And then the first Wednesday in December is December 7th.
Okay, I think I'll be out for the 2nd November one.
Okay.
I have the same thing. I'll be in Israel on the 16th.
Okay.
That's okay. We've got Zoom, guys.
What's that now?
Yeah, the time change on yours would be pretty.
Yeah.
Okay, well,
If I
with
can
that,
get connected.
we'll close the meeting.
I think, did you want to make an announcement about this? Or did you want to? Oh. Okay, thank you. Just so we know what we're talking about, the American Planning Association and Planning Association of Washington gave the students of UW-Evans School of Public Policy and Governance a planning award on their climate change public perception study.
Oh,
So,
nice.
That's awesome.
So recognition of what the city asked them to do, but also recognition of what they did. Which,
Yeah,
if you remember, went above and beyond because
Yeah.
they came up with not only the recommendations about how to deal with climate change with the public, but also just a general, hey, if you want to get people to engage with you, you need to change up how you do it. So we're actually going to be incorporating their recommendations into the 24 process.
great.